Hi, Scott.
Oh, Frank, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, okay. I can't hear you, but I've had my, my laptop's been acting up since I had it updated. And so I'm not sure if it's working properly.
But I hear you clearly.
You're the first one. Well, no, there's somebody else here.
Yeah, Fatima.
I still can't hear you.
Oh, okay. I'm not. We'll see if she could. Okay.
You're unmuted, but you must not have a microphone on or plugged in or something.
Plugged in. Let me get out of it. Oh, give me just a moment. Okay.
Oh, wait, maybe let me make sure my.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
No, I think it's my computer, my microphone or my speakers aren't working, but I guess I'll just assume that people can hear me and will, let me.
And you still can't hear us? Scott?
Well, I'll wait another minute. My speaker isn't working. I've had my computer updated last week and it hasn't been working properly. And so I'll, if you want to talk to me, you'll have to, I'll have the chat open so you can contact me through that. I can see the messages in the chat, but for some reason, I can't get the speaker, my external speakers or my laptop speakers to work. So I'm just going to go ahead and since you can hear me, and I will go through the presentation, and then if you have any questions at the end, I will come to the chat for that. So let me share my screen with you. So can you see the screen with my presentation? So good afternoon. My name is Scott Lancaster, and this is a presentation that I've been thinking about doing for a while. And I guess anytime we do it, there's always going to be something going on in current events that is getting a lot of attention. But the reason that I wanted to do this was not only because I wanted to address in some ways how to interpret the news, how to deal with the so-called fake news or with news bias, which may vary from place to place. But I wanted to look at how we could research current events that were happening right now, because back when in the spring, when we first went into sort of lockdown with the virus, within a week, I had people starting to contact me looking for peer-reviewed articles about the virus and about things that were happening right now. And I was like, well, you're not going to get anything. I mean, it takes at least, normally it would take up to a year for something to filter into peer-reviewed scholarship. But in this case, I saw peer-reviewed things coming out in a few months, but still it was not going to be a week. So that's why I wanted to look at the types of resources that one would use if you were researching something that was happening right now. And of course, like I said, the gold standard for academic research is found in peer-reviewed journals and scholarly monographs. But you may sometimes find yourself with an assignment that deals with current events, such as the virus or the 2020 presidential election. And this seminar will help you understand how to be a savvy user of information resources about current events in a post-truth world of opinion, social media, confirmation bias, misinformation, and disinformation. And the term post-truth, I was interested to find it in the Oxford English Dictionary, and looking at the second definition, relating to or denoting circumstances in which objective facts are less influential in shaping political debate or public opinion than appeals to emotion and personal belief. And so the types of resources, information comes in a variety of formats, and the type of information you need will change depending on the question you're trying to answer and the source that would be considered acceptable for your purpose. So when it is current events, then it's going to more than likely be newspapers that are going to be the place that you're going to get your sources, although you may begin to hear about it in social media or in broadcast media. But eventually, I would, think that you would turn to the print newspaper sources. And to kind of just look briefly at the publication cycle, because this spans the timeline of the type of when something happens. You will start out at the day of the event with broadcast news and the web, and then you move to print and online newspapers, popular and news magazines, scholarly peer-reviewed journals, and academic and popular books. And to go into those a little bit more explicitly, something happens. There's something that happens. we have an election, or we have a lockdown from the virus, and you start to see posts about it in social media, and you may begin to see reports on television news. The information that you find will change frequently, and it's crucial to keep in mind that the information presented may not be correct. Days later, one day or a few days later, come the newspapers. In the days following the event, as more information is known, newspapers start to cover the event, but there still may be incorrect information presented. And then briefly, weeks later, magazines will come. You'll have weekly news magazines or monthly opinion magazines that will cover the event. Most of the facts should be accurate, but could be reported with an opinionated perspective or bias. It is important to remember that the people writing about the event are journalists, not scholars, and not experts in the area of the event. And then months and years later is when the scholarly communication comes, which is the main thing that librarians will be teaching about and pointing people to. But when you're dealing with an event that's happening right now, you don't have access to that. There's a gap in time as researchers study the event and write articles about their findings. Those articles will go through a process called peer review before publication. Years later, scholarly as well as popular books will be published about the event. And this scholarly communication will in all likelihood use newspapers and other types of immediate reporting that has been done to at least familiarize themselves with what's happening. And quite often newspapers can be used as primary sources for this type of thing. And then it's important to understand, since we're focusing primarily on news articles and to a lesser extent broadcast media, for very recent current events, you will likely need to rely on newspapers as an information source. They're usually published daily. They report about current events. They're written by journalists who either witness an event firsthand or make contact with those who are directly involved. Articles go through an editorial fact-checking process. Inaccuracies may occur because of the urgency to get the information out, and they're best treated as primary sources. And I found this to be kind of interesting that, like firearms, newspapers have a unique footprint in the history of our country. I read last year an article that was written by someone in Australia who was commenting on trying to figure out why the right to bear arms was such a critical thing in the United States and why it was so foundational. And he pointed out how, really the birth of the country came about because of the use of firearms. And in the same way, newspapers were very critical in the birth of the country, as it was like a rebellion against authority, and communication was done through the newspapers, and fighting was done through the arms. And so it's really two things that are really foundational to this country. And in fact, it's in the First Amendment of the Constitution. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievances. So it's that freedom of speech and freedom of the press that makes newspapers such an important tool to our democracy. And there was a court case in 1945 that sort of established the need to have differing voices in these publications. It was the Associated Press versus the United States. And in the Supreme Court finding, this is a quote from it, One of the most vital of all general interests is the dissemination of news from as many different sources and with as many different facets and colors as is possible. That interest is closely akin to, if indeed it is not the same as, the interest protected by the First Amendment. It presupposes that right conclusions are more likely to be gathered out of a multitude of tongues than through any kind of authoritative selection. So it's that expectation that there's going to be a multitude of tongues that will then lead to what some people might say is bias in journalism, because if you're supposed to be voicing one view or another view about something that's happening, there's going to be an opinion that comes with it. Bias occurs when information is presented in a way that gives disproportionate weight in favor of or against something. We expect academic articles to be objective, but bias is usually an inherent, expected, and necessary part of journalism. And you can see the example of bias from the election in the 50s. And even Walter Cronkite, who was, famously known or thought to be the most trusted man in America, because he was the one that was telling the news to everybody. And I remember when I was a little boy hearing his news, and it was a very nervous time because of the Vietnam War and unrest because of civil rights efforts. And even to the point that people were surprised, I heard, to see him cry when he announced that President Kennedy had died after he was shot in Dallas, because people just really didn't even see him as having any kind of feelings, because he really made an effort to present the news in a non-biased way. But even he has said, we are not educated well enough to perform the necessary act of intelligently selecting our leaders. And so, in other words, it's from his point of view, it's the journalist's job to present the news in a way that the masses can understand it. And that necessarily comes with a point of view and with a certain bias. And this was explained in a reference work that we have in the library called From Culture Wars in America, an encyclopedia of issues, viewpoints, and voices. Right-wing critics of the media tend to identify journalists as the source of media bias. Bernard Goldberg's best-selling Bias in 2002 argues that the personal views of journalists are overwhelmingly liberal, and that this gives a liberal shape to their news stories. On the other hand, left-wing critics of the media tend to focus on the effects of economic power, especially the influence of corporate ownership and funding on the media. Eric Alterman's What Liberal Media in 2003, which was a critical response to Bernard Goldberg, argues that while there is some merit to the charge that the media are liberal on social issues, there is clear conservative bias in the media when it comes to economic issues. So interestingly, both sides of the kind of political spectrum in this country pretty much agree that there's some type of bias in the media. And bias isn't bad. I mean, bias is just, you can't convey information without some type of bias. And taking something from British politics, because I don't want to be too argumentative, I was struck last spring when I saw these two headlines that from the two major UK papers that were describing or reporting on Queen Elizabeth's speech to the nation, which I don't know if you watched the speech, but I found it to be very stirring. And she remarked back to World War II and things. She really gave a comforting speech. The Times headline was "The Queen's Speech. The monarch delivered a practical message last night to stay at home. It was also a reminder that this is a moment for the nation to come together." And then on the other hand, The Guardian, which has a very different point of view, said, "Queen praises the people, if not the government, and pulls off a tough gig. Monarch's rare non-festive TV address delivered the clear moral leadership that many politicians have failed to provide. So you can see that that it's reporting about the same thing, but putting it in a very different tone. And then I also found this example, which there's a lot of talk about it on the internet, but it was from 2016 when Trump met with the leader of Mexico. And it's the exact same article. I mean, the article itself is word for word the same, but the title of the morning edition was Trump Softens His Tone. And the title of the afternoon edition was Trump Talks Tough on Wall. So even, the very same article can have a different tone in it, depending on what they want to convey. And then likewise, something that going back a few years, there was sort of some ongoing controversy after the Kennedy assassination about whether school children in the U.S., in Dallas, had cheered when they heard that Kennedy was assassinated. And initial reports said that they did, that they were told over a loudspeaker that go home, the president has been assassinated, and that they cheered and they ran from the school laughing and happy. But there were follow-up reports where there were teachers that were saying that the children were not told that the president was dead. They were just told, go home, there's no more school for the rest of the day, because they thought it was the parents' place to tell them. And so when they were leaving, they were cheering because they just thought they had a free day. And it really, I think it's not been really resolved. There were sort of ongoing things that I read one way or the other, but it's just an interesting thing where it's the same story that is presented in a very different tone. And then turning to the databases that we have, because that was the main point of what I wanted to present, was what material does the library have that will present these news sources to you. We have Access World News Research Collection, in which, among other publications, we have got extended coverage of the Dallas Morning News, the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, and the Houston Chronicle. And those would go back for several years. And then there's many other newspapers in there that we also have, but we extensively make a larger collection with those 3 Texas newspapers. And then we have 2 other databases, the Global Breaking News Wires and US News Streams. And these both, you can look and view which publications are available in them. You can see in Global Breaking News Wires, there's 58 different news sources, news wires, and they're from all over the world that are collected there. And with the new US News Stream, there are even more of more smaller organizations throughout the US. And then we also have the New York Times digital edition, which you can sign up for, and that can come onto your phone or your iPad or through your laptop. I like the Wall Street Journal, and my favorite way to access it is ABI Informed Collection. It just seems it's easier to pare down to a specific issue that I might want. And they have today's issue in it. They will have all the way up to the very current. And if you want to find out about information about a newspaper, you can look it up in the Ulrich's periodicals directory. For instance, this is an example from the Detroit Free Press. It will tell you that it's published daily since 1835. I like to get my official website from Ulrichs rather than Google, because I don't know for sure if when I look up the title in Google, if it's really taking me to the correct website. So Ulrichs will give you the actual official website of it. And it also tells you that it's available in ProQuest Central from 99 to the present. We have ProQuest Central, so I know that we should have access to articles in the Detroit Free Press. And then if you go to their website, freep.com, you look on a newspaper's website for an About Us. If it's, that will be perhaps at the top, or it could be all the way at the bottom. And with the Detroit Free Press, I found it at the bottom where it said ethical conduct or ethical principles. And it went into detail, but the six main things that the six main headings were seeking and reporting the truth in a meaningful way, serving the public interest, exercising fair play, maintaining independence, and acting with integrity. And they gave details in there about how they would do that. And I mean, keep in mind that any news organization is most likely going to present itself as non-biased, and they will hopefully, be presenting the facts in a truthful way. But keep in mind that the bias is really, in my opinion, an integral part of news organizations as they function in our society. And tied in with this, because so much of what you see, especially immediately, might come through social media, is confirmation bias. Once we've formed a view, we embrace information that confirms that view while ignoring or rejecting information that casts doubt on it. Confirmation bias suggests that we can't perceive circumstances objectively. We pick out those bits of data that make us feel good because they confirm our prejudices. This is an example of, because I think you have to realize, first of all, the information sources that you're looking at are have some type of bias behind them. And then you have to realize you also have your own bias. And when you understand that, I think then you can go through the critical thinking process of evaluating what you're reading. And you can find guides on the internet. This is a particular one that is trying to show in the center column, this is what they're saying are news from the center, and then they've got news from the right and news from the left. And I wouldn't necessarily agree with the way that they categorize everything, but I think it's a good thing to use for your own self, to think about it for yourself, to see how it can be, how news is categorized. This is from a website, Adfontes Media. And what's interesting about this one, you'll see, and this is mostly broadcast media. They change it every few months because in their opinion, news organizations will move, they'll change their editorial policy, they'll change their point of view. So generally they don't move things a lot. They will move, maybe Fox News a little further to the right or a little further to the center, or MSNBC or CNN will move, further to the left or further to the center. But if you look, they've got all of their history of the way that they've categorized these things. And you can look at how it's changed in their opinion over time. And it not only goes from conservative to liberal, but also from what they're considering to be fact-based to inaccurate fabrications, like the National Enquirer. And then I found, this is one that I found that I like because it's blank. And I think, because I think ultimately each person needs to sort of be able to decide for themselves, should recognize for themselves whether the news that they're reading, what the bias is behind it, and how, and interpret that through their own bias. And you can then either use it in your scholarship or use it through whatever other types of decisions that you have to make in your life, whether it's voting or deciding something about healthcare. Are there any questions while I'm looking at the chat? Since well, I think that all of you know how to use the databases. There are only a very few of the databases. I guess I will show you. I'll just take a minute to show you how to find the news databases. So this is a library homepage, and if you go to databases, and under database type, news and current events, Access World News Collection is the one that I mentioned, that if you could go to the Dallas Morning News or the Houston Chronicle separately. However, they're part of this larger collection, and you can actually access them from within this. So you could go to Dallas Morning News or Fort Worth Star-Telegram or the Houston Chronicle, and you can say, it will give you suggested topics and hot topics. So there are, and you can also, US News Stream and Global Breaking News Wires. Both of these look the same, but I particularly wanted to point out where you can find what publications are in here. And because these are news wires, they're not specific newspapers. They're something that would be, I think, equivalent to the Associated Press. But you'll see there's 61, actually 58 news wires. And they're spread all over the world. So you can see the different periods of coverage. So it's through these databases that you would get the current events that you might have from time to time in an assignment. There are ways, to tie these things back to peer-reviewed articles. Like you could find peer-reviewed articles about past contested elections, about the 2000 election or elections before that, or international elections. You could find peer-reviewed articles about prior pandemics and how that's been handled. So if you are trying to write something that has scholarly material in it that is about a current event, I would suggest taking information from news articles and pairing it with an argument that you're making through using peer-reviewed articles that are about related but not exactly the same thing. Well, that's all I have. I'm sorry that my computer speakers weren't working, so I can't hear you all. But if you have any comments, please put them in the chat now, and I'll wait a few seconds. And if there isn't anything after that, then I will say thank you and close out. And like I said, this is all my opinion. I mean, I think people could argue differently about whether news is as biased as what I'm saying it is. And I'm not saying it's inaccurate. I'm just saying it's got a point of view behind it. And to understand that helps us interpret it better. But thank you. And if anybody's interested, I could send out a recording of this. Or if you have any suggestions on how I could do this better in the future, please let me know. But thank you and goodbye.